simply put, supply went up at a time when it didn't need to go up. And that's partly because of this oil grouping that people might have heard of, OPEC and OPEC Plus. So OPEC is the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries. It's been around since the 70s, really. And they essentially come together. It's about 13 or so countries. And they come together. Their objective is to essentially ensure that they can sort of manage oil output. At least that was the idea back in the 70s. But OPEC's influence over the years has waned a great deal, because now there's a whole rise of other producers who are not members of OPEC, who produce a fairly large amount of oil, and therefore OPEC's ability to swing markets and swing prices has been diminished to a large extent. If you look at the top 3 oil producers in the world at the moment, the top 2 are actually not members of OPEC. It's Russia and Saudi Arabia. Well, Russia and the United States. Saudi Arabia is still in there, depending on what number you want to use. So they'll either be at the top end, second or third. So OPEC produced a lot of oil. At the end of the last price war that they had with the United States, because at the time the Saudi strategy was to try and essentially regain market share, and their plan was fairly simple: produce a lot of cheap oil, try and drive these guys out of the market. So eventually they came to an agreement, a détente, if you will, and said, okay, fine, we're going to stop. We're going to start reining in production. Now, the problem with their approach of reining in production is you've reduced supply. This is all pre-COVID. You've reduced supply. Fair enough. But who then benefits from rising oil prices? It's not you guys as OPEC, because you've already reduced supply, right? You've moved out of the market. If demand remains exactly where it is, it's these other agile producers who come in and then benefit, right? So their strategy basically backfired. And this is, from that window of leading up to 2014 and then another period around 2016, give or take. So then they decided, okay, we can't do this by ourselves, so we need to work with other oil producers, which is now OPEC Plus comes in. OPEC Plus basically includes the other big producer, which is Russia. Now, the main issue with the production cycle this time round was that OPEC wanted to continue with production cuts, but there was disagreement on who should shoulder these cuts, number one, and number two, how much should we cut and over what period of time. Saudi Arabia said, okay, fine, we have a deal that essentially ends at some point in the first quarter of 2020. If no one wants to agree to an extension, fine, then we'll just flood the market, we'll get back to form. And unfortunately, at the same time, we had this little thing called a pandemic. It's come along and demand has nosedived. We're barely driving. If you look across Africa, by the end of the first quarter, by end April and March, 90% of the fleets were grounded. So you can imagine just how much demand has evaporated virtually overnight. And if supply is here and demand is down here, prices have to adjust. So prices inevitably crash.